Welcome to another episode of Crawfordsville Connection, the City of Crawfordsville's weekly podcast that comes out every Monday morning. I'm your host, Sarah Summer, and I'm joined in the studio every week with Mayor Todd Barton to keep our community up to date on current events, city workings, and to hear from community members on a variety of topics. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed the show. Welcome back to another episode of Crawfordsville Connection. I'm your host, Sarah Summer, and today I'm joined in the studio by Mayor Todd Barton.
Hello.
Hello, and we have Brandy Allen with us again, but we're not doing a general update.
It's not a general update.
Not this time. We did that last week.
Going to dive a little deeper into something.
Yes, we're going to talk all about the Market Street Rail Crossing Elimination Grant. I know we've talked about this pretty generically in our general updates and just kind of surface level. We've got a couple episodes that we'll reference later that we dove into some of this information, but we're going to bring it up again because we know we get the question of, is this happening? We haven't seen any work done. And
we have some upcoming
yes,
opportunities for people to put input.
Yes. So it's time for a little bit deeper dive into an update on this. But before we get started, Mayor, do you have any announcements?
Well, I have a couple. We will have Crawfordsville Day of Scouting, the Mayor's Breakfast for Scouting on March 18th at 8 a.m., Crawfordsville District Public Library. There's information on the city's social media about that if you're interested in attending. It's an annual event we do to recognize scouting and its role in our community and hopefully raise some funds for local scout troops.
Yes.
And then I've set the date for the community forum in March. It will be on March 23rd. That's a Monday, 4 to 5 p.m. here in the mayor's office. So Monday, March 23rd, 4 to 5 p.m. If you have something on your mind, question, concern, complaint, suggestion, whatever, stop by and see me.
Perfect. And those are a good opportunity to listen if you're just curious too, and maybe you're just trying to learn some things. It's a good, opportunity. And it goes back to what we say, we're trying to be transparent, accessible, and
absolutely. Yeah.
This is a perfect opportunity. And sometimes you have nobody show up.
That happens. I think that happened last month.
Yes.
Believe it or not. So it does happen from time to time. And there are the times that there are a lot of people there. You just never know. It depends on what's on people's minds. As the weather improves, hopefully we can get outside. My goal is to get to the neighborhood parks, move it around the city that way. But it seems to me that doing it here has worked out. I didn't really like doing it that way at first. I always wanted to kind of rotate around to local restaurants and stuff, but having it here seems to work out really well. So we just kind of been sticking with that.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, we'll just dive right in and talk about what is this Market Street Rail Crossing Elimination Grant that we've been talking about.
So, if you rewind, obviously we have an issue with the crossing on Market Street, which is also 3 state highways. So it's an NDOT road. It's US 136, State Road 47, State Road 32, all those bottleneck right there at this problematic rail crossing. And as I always tell people from outside Crawfordsville, when I talk about our rail issue, they're like, "Oh, we have railroad crossings too, blah, blah, blah. We understand." I'm like, you don't understand. This is not the same thing.
Right.
Passing trains are not our problem. Stopped trains are our problem.
Yes.
And when they're stopped for hours on end, it becomes really a monumental problem. So we have struggled with that in our community for, not forever, but for decades. There were some changes, and we talked about this in an earlier episode, some rail mergers and things that happened, years ago that changed the rail traffic flow through Crawfordsville and started to cause these problems. And so we applied on the state side for funding several times. We tried to push that pretty heavily. This is a state highway. Come on, state of Indiana, you need to address this. And it has totally fallen on deaf ears with state government. I'll just say that. Continuously pushed off to, well, you should apply for federal money. And we did a couple of times and we're not successful. And then we took a different approach and applied through not federal highway, but we applied through the Federal Railroad Administration, and we used data to back up our application. And we talk a lot about that in the earlier episodes, but we'll talk a little bit more today. And that was successful, and we were funded. So what we have now is a planning grant. So it's not a construction grant. And we still occasionally see people on social media like, well, I thought the city was going to put a bridge in, they were awarded this money. The money was not for construction. It's for the planning. And I don't think people understand how complicated planning for something like this is. It is very complicated, and we're going to talk about that.
Yeah, it's not going to be a fast process.
No.
It's detailed, and there is a lot of work that's happening behind the scenes. And I think that's where that confusion comes in from the community of, well, we're not seeing anything happen, but that doesn't mean nothing is happening. So talk a little bit about what that planning process is like, what is involved in that. And, you think, oh, just plan, just do it. But what all goes into that?
Yeah, so I realize that there isn't a lot that the public is seeing, but there's so much work happening behind the scenes. They may have actually seen surveyors out looking around and marking everything from utilities and right of way and that kind of thing. So they're taking all of that data, collecting all of the data, looking at any possible issues that we may have conflicts with, whether that's with traffic, utilities. There are historic buildings in the area, so just making sure that there are minimal impacts along those lines. Just really looking at stormwater, everything that you can possibly imagine. This is a really broad process, going and looking for any environmental impacts, just really doing the research to see what we really want this to be a complete solution at the time that we're ready to move forward with an application. So we want to make sure that we have considered really everything that there is to consider in the process, looking at the traffic that comes through and all of those options. What we're trying to do now with all of this work is to identify the best solution. So what step of the process that we're in right now is putting together this planning package so that we can move forward with completing the final design. And that planning package basically looks at all the alternatives and then identifies the best solution to move forward. So is that an overpass? Is it an underpass? Is it a reroute? Things like that. So we take all of that data that they've been collecting, all of the public input that we've received, all of the information that we know. There have been or will be meetings upcoming with State Highway, with the railroad, with all of these stakeholders. There have been meetings with each individual utility, so we can combine all that information and put that into the best plan to move forward so that we're ready to make application.
Yeah, setting us up to apply for the actual construction funding on the federal side. And when you talk about federal money, you have to cover all these bases. You have to have investigated every aspect of this. And I think one that's kind of important to point out is the historical impact. So how many historic sites would this impact? And those are not always what you think. Like, there are historic sites that you don't think of as historic in our downtown. So you have to think about those and what the impact would be. I still occasionally hear people say, we should rebuild the bridge over Pike Street over the railroad. That's literally right next to the Wallace Study. If you think the federal government will let us do that, you better think twice, because that is not going to happen in any way, shape, or form because of the historical impact. So you have to look at all of those things, the totality, and we're learning a lot. I'm seeing stuff in this process. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that site had this designation, or this piece of property had this going on or that going on. So it's a lot of due diligence to prepare.
Yeah. And why is this important? You've talked a little bit about some of, the issues, but dive a little deeper into what is this really impacting when those trains are stopped or when there is heavy train traffic?
Well, it's a profound impact, and we'll talk about the data here in a minute. But, if you think about stopping all the traffic on 3 state highways and a major city street, it just causes total gridlock. And what we see in Crawfordsville is panic. I mean, we note this in in our application, like panic sets in. It's interesting. If I'm in my office here on Pike Street, I usually know when there's a train blocking because I will hear cars coming down Pike Street, and I can tell
they're mad.
They're mad. You can tell because they're on the gas and away they go, and you can just tell. You look and think, oh, there must be a train because everybody's in panic mode. You can literally tell, and so that has a profound impact on the community. But it's easy to say, well, everybody should just go around, but the semi trucks can't. They can't make the turn, like the turn at Water and Wabash, especially when there's a lot of traffic there. They're not going to make that turn.
Right.
And so everything just becomes gridlock at that point. And then you think about emergency services, fire, police, EMS, trying to get through there. I can give you a whole list of examples where that's gone wrong and potentially can cost people their lives. So all those things come together there to create problems. And another factor that we didn't think about as much that we've discovered in the data is the pedestrian side of this.
Right.
We have video footage of pedestrians literally inches from being struck by a train.
Yeah.
We had a study period where we looked at this. There was actually a pedestrian fatality in that study period.
Mhm.
So it's a dangerous issue that we need to address because people also use the rail as a route, as a
Mhm.
walking path, unfortunately. And we see it on video all the time, which is extremely dangerous through there.
Yeah. Yeah. And NDOT traffic, they did some studies on the counts of traffic, and there's approximately 16,492 vehicles that go through that area each day,
Every day.
which is crazy to think about.
That's a lot. That's a lot of
And,
vehicles.
you think about how much that can impact, our restaurants and those things too, when things are stopped. I know we had talked about in an earlier episode, delivery drivers, they're on a route and they have a timeline, and sometimes that impacts, okay, I can't get to this restaurant on time. I have to skip it, which then impacts business for those restaurants. And
Yeah, in our study, we had restaurants tell us like some weeks they missed their delivery because the delivery
Yeah.
people are like, we can't get to you.
yeah,
We have to stay on time. We're just bypassing
Yeah.
Crawfordsville and going on to the next place.
it's
Well, and the school buses headed to the
Yes.
schools. There's transporting of people from the jail to court dates.
Mhm.
There were people when we met with the residents in the area, people talking about not being able to get to the pharmacy or, just different places that really it really divides the community. So
Yeah. And some of this data, so we went into pretty good depth of the data in episode 165, and that was January 15th of 2024. But then we also did a special episode release when we actually were awarded the funding on January 16th of 2025. And both of those episodes will give you all of the data numbers that you're looking for in terms of cost, benefit, how many vehicles, how many interactions there were with trains. But do you want to highlight some of the information that we pulled out of that data? Because that's really what made our application so strong, is the data was extremely compelling.
It was. And what I said, I mentioned earlier that we'd applied before on the state and federal side. And, people in Crawfordsville understand there's a problem, but when you're trying to convince somebody in Indianapolis or DC that there's a
Mhm.
traffic problem with trains in Crawfordsville, Indiana,
Right.
you get this perplexed look.
Mhm.
And I still recall one of our follow-up meetings with Federal Highway in DC, and the guy just said, look, you don't know what traffic is in Little Crawfordsville, Indiana.
Right.
You don't have a problem,
Right.
right? And I looked at Google Earth, and there's a bridge over the railroad right in
Mhm.
the middle of Crawfordsville. So I knew right then we had to step back and we had to use data. And when we did, the data was overwhelming and it was funded. So what we did is we had a study period from September 19th, 2022 through July 31st of 24.
Mhm.
And we have cameras on the crossing. We have electronic surveillance on the crossing that allows us to monitor what's going on. And in that time, there was a total of 5,012 trains passed through there.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because when we applied before, we had to use the data that's given to us by the railroad.
Right.
And it'll show like 1 point something trains per day. And I'm always looking at that thinking that's
Like, there's
there's
no way.
no way that's even remotely close to accurate. In the mornings, there's at least 3 or 4 trains just in the mornings,
Yeah.
right? So we knew that wasn't right. The crossing was blocked anywhere between 4 and 17 hours per month, or about 42 minutes a day. Now, I will note that study period, we didn't have any of the really long
Right.
episodes. I mean, just the way it fell. Conveniently, just the way it fell, we didn't have any of those 4, 5, 6 hour blockages in that study period. But still, it's a pretty compelling number. So if you take those numbers and you take the time that's blocked, U.S. Department of Transportation has a benefit cost analysis formula you can use. So if you use their formula and you use those numbers, it's about a little over $7,000 per day from the impacts. Think
Yeah.
about that, $7,315 per day in impact because of that crossing being blocked. 4.8 million impact over the study period, and the total annual impact roughly about 2.67 million a year, an impact on businesses and people in lost productivity in our community because that crossing is blocked.
That's crazy.
That is crazy. Then we took it a step further because we knew that the federal government always wanted us to talk about the environmental impact of these issues as well. And think about all the cars sitting there, and all the fuel that's wasted, and all the emissions coming out of those trucks and cars. So we used their formula again, and 155.2 idling hours per year. Think about that. That's a lot of idling vehicles sitting there. 55,895 gallons of gasoline that's wasted from people sitting at that crossing waiting. 11,056 gallons of diesel wasted. That's a lot of gas and diesel from just sitting there waiting on these trains. Then we use that number to come up with how many metric tons of CO2 it produced, which is 609 metric tons. And if you monetize that, it comes out to like $32,900 per year is the CO2 reduction value. So using the federal formula to convince the federal government to fund our to take care of our problem, and it worked. So
it was successful because of our local data collection, like you had said. The information we were getting before was not accurate.
No, if we just relied on outside data, we would not be funded. And we had to show them we had a problem in Crawfordsville, and on the surface they could not see that.
Yeah.
Anecdotal evidence doesn't work.
Correct.
Yes. And me trying to explain how upset people in Crawfordsville get doesn't work.
Right.
They don't know. Trust me, people get upset about the train issue more so than anything else. So you have to kind of put it in numbers for them.
So knowing that we applied for this and we're in the process of this planning grant now, and the next step after that is applying for construction funding. If that is awarded, what all will that include for this next steps?
So basically, at the end of this process, we should have a set of plans that are pretty much ready to go. They won't be final, but they'll be as close to final as we can get them without having the funding in a project. We will have gone through the entire environmental process, so we'll have all those clearances and be ready to move forward. We'll have those. We'll know the things that need to be taken care of and be on the way on that. We will work with the railroad to have agreements for all of that. It's going to involve significant coordination with the railroad during construction, as they will not stop using the railroad while that's under construction. So all of that will have to be outlined. Right-of-way coordination. We will be working, and I think we'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, but we will be working with the property owners in the area because there will be some impacts. There may have to be some acquisitions. There may have to be some just changing of properties. So we'll have significant work that we'll have to work through with those property owners, going through all of the permit process with state and federal agencies. So this is a multi-year process, and it's a very detailed process, but we should be ready to move forward so that we will be ready to hit the ground running if we were to be awarded funding for construction.
Yeah, and like we said, it's a multi-year process. This is not happening overnight. It's not fast, and it's not an easy choice. People can say, "Oh, just build this or just do this," but there are a lot of impacts, like you had mentioned, and things that I think you had mentioned last week in our general update. We don't want to just build an overpass and just change the look of our downtown. We have to think about how does this impact daily operations as a whole.
This is almost, like a moment of reckoning, I think, for our community. I don't think the community has realized that yet. I have. I know Brandy has. But because we talk about this and everybody says, fix this, put an overpass, you should just fix this. Well, there are a lot of things to think about when you do that. Yeah. And there are potentially side effects that we might not like, right?
Right.
And so I do remember when we announced that we were awarded, right out of the gate, I had some emails, some calls, people saying, look, we don't want you to change the look of that area. Well, either you change it or you don't, right? And we cannot change it, and you can wait on trains. That's fine. But if that's what you want, that's what you want. Or we can change it, and it's going to have some impact. So what I like about this process right now is I think we're really paying attention to not having as many negative impacts as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Don't create that monolithic concrete structure over our historic downtown that
Right.
everybody hates. Do it in a way that fits with our historic downtown. And I
Mhm.
think we're really on the path to doing just that.
Yeah.
So it will have impacts. I mean, there is no doubt about it.
Right.
Water Street, where it connects to Market, that will not exist
Mhm.
if this happens, right? So there are
Yeah.
things like that you have to think about. There's some buildings that will come down,
Mm-hmm.
some traffic patterns that will have to change. So, nothing's committed yet, and that's why
Right.
we're having these public meetings and input. And I'll be honest, I'm kind of looking at the public like, do you want this fixed and there will be impacts, or are you telling me just leave it as is?
Yeah.
And if that's the case, we're going to have to learn to live with the rail issues.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we are not. I'm going to emphasize this very heavily. We are not going to change the behavior of the railroad.
Right.
And we legally don't have the authority to change the
Yeah.
behavior of the railroad. That misconception is still out there. Like, you should go arrest the train crew. We cannot do that, folks.
Can't
Cannot do that any way, shape, or form.
So what happens next? We've got the funding. We're in this process of planning. What's next? We've mentioned some of these public input sessions. What does that look like for people? What can people expect?
Sure. So as we've mentioned, we are really heavy into the details right now moving forward, but we are about to kick off the public involvement in that process. And part of that starts with there's also been, branding and marketing for this project so that we'll be able to push out regular updates, and the members of our community will recognize that that's a part of this project.
Right.
So there will be a project website. There will be frequent updates on this process. The very first thing that we're going to do is engage those property owners. I know that from the time we made the announcement, there have been people concerned about what does this mean for me? We don't have all of those answers yet, but we don't want anyone to be sitting in the dark with no idea what's happening. So we are planning a property owner meeting in April that those people will be getting notice of pretty soon. And then also just a general public meeting in April. We'll be holding meetings at the Career Academy in Commerce Park. And it'll just provide an opportunity for people to come in, provide input, kind of get caught up on what's been happening behind the scenes, and really be involved in this process. Because again, like Mayor Barton said, this is going to impact everyone.
Right.
And we want to make sure that as a community, we're moving forward on this together.
And public input was so important when we applied.
Mm-hmm.
The public input side of our application, I talk about the data because that was really good, but the public input side was really powerful as well, because when you heard it in people's words and the way people described it, I mean, even the talk about panic, people being panicked, that came out of one of those public input sessions, and they were exactly right. That's exactly what happens. So public input is really, really important, and we need to hear from people about this issue. And I know people are perturbed by the. Trust me, being mayor of Crawfordsville when there's a train blocking the crossing is not not a highlight anybody would like. People are just angry all the way around.
Yeah.
And our hands are kind of tied. We can kind of work on traffic flow and some of those things, but it's tough. And so we're on the path, I think, to a solution. It's a long-term solution. We have to come to terms with this at some point in Crawfordsville if we're going to get, going to be successful and get past it. It is a detriment on the economic development side, I will tell you.
Right.
If a business is looking at our community and they talk to other businesses and this issue comes up, it's a negative. And we have to erase as many of those as we can. So just encourage people to come to those input sessions and be honest about the train issue and how it impacts you or doesn't impact you.
Yeah. Well, I think next steps for those listening is to stay tuned to our social media and our city's current website, as we'll post their links to this new project website, as well as information about dates, times, location for these public input sessions. And there's kind of a few different series of them. There's multiple. So
Correct.
People will be able to give their input at different steps of the project and, talk about how does it impact you? How is it, what suggestions do you have? What feedback can you give? And, again, we'll go from there. This is, Mayor, like you had said, we want this to be a community-driven process in terms of what's going to happen in our community because we can't make that decision on our own.
It'll be a profound impact.
Yeah.
It could be really good if
right.
we do it right, and we don't have to deal with the train issue anymore.
Yeah.
Can you imagine what that would be like?
Yeah.
Be nice, but it will change things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you both so much. I think, again, this is just an episode that we wanted to kind of give these next steps and remind people that this is happening. There is work happening. It's behind the scenes, at this current moment, but things are coming down the pipeline to get the public involved, get that input, and make sure your voice can be heard on this. And as always, if you have questions about this topic, want to know more, feel free to reach out to us and let us know. And if you have things that you want to hear about in future episodes, let us know that as well. And don't forget to check out Yodel, our community connections calendar and newsfeed for all things happening in Crawfordsville in one easy, convenient location. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. Make sure you hit the subscribe button on this podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you aren't already, follow us on Facebook at City of Crawfordsville Official, on Twitter at City of Seaville, and on Instagram at City of Crawfordsville. We hope you have a wonderful day and can't wait for you to join us next week.